excited that anybody is here after all the thunderstorms that we had this afternoon. I was just sure that I was not going to appear tonight. And on Facebook, I was trying to console all my friends who were one by one saying, we can't be there. Don't expect us to go down Central in the rain. So I said, okay, well, so I'm thrilled that you all are here. And I'm going to try to take you on a really fun journey tonight. How many of you all were here when all the Dallas filming was happening in this area? Oh, a lot of people. So you probably saw perspectives that I never saw. So I'm maybe afterwards you can tell me anything at all that I've missed that, you can kind of fill in some of the blanks, because no matter, it went on for all the way from all the way up to 1991. That was the year that the Dallas Times-Herald closed. At that point, I was at the Dallas Morning News in 1977, being society editor, and the whole cast came in 1978. So you can imagine, on top of all the other things that were happening in Dallas, here we had a TV show, and nobody ever thought it would ever succeed. The Dallas people, like me, were a little bit arrogant about the whole idea. They don't know what they're talking about or whatever. So anyway, let me take you down the memory trail, and we'll talk about Dallas one more time. I love how Tom had the original credits for Dallas. And, you've already seen Larry Hagman up there like this. Okay, there I am with Larry. It looks like we posed for a publicity photo. That was at the Cattle Barons Ball. And I think it was at the first year that they opened South Fork to the public and to the press, so that everybody could see what the inside of South Fork looked like. So you can see that we were all, everybody at that point felt like they knew Larry like a old family friend. In the New York Times in 2012, they actually said it was like Dallas was the capital of America, which it really was, because there were so many people coming here thinking that this was the land of honey and money and everything that you'd ever want. And it said in the New York Times, there was always something familiar about J.R., the way he couched his overconfidence and malice in the relaxed, folksy wisdom of the country boy. Even when he was outnumbered, he never felt outmatched. And the more power he had, the more sure he felt that power was his birthright. So if you get that from the New York Times, you can be sure that, all of us felt pretty much the same way. Okay, that's one of my books. I put out my two books in, I think it was 2012 and 2016. And I think they're slightly out of print now, and on Amazon, they cost like $80, which I apologize for, but they cost $50 when they came out. So they're thick. I just don't write small. I keep writing until I give out of words. Okay, that's the Dallas celebrity book. And there you saw that. Okay, this is what Dallas looked like. A puny, pathetic little city in 1978. We were pretty proud of it, but we didn't think that it was anything that special. You can see, I bet you don't think it was that special either. You had Republic Bank, and you had a couple of tall buildings, but it didn't look like anything that you would put on a picture postcard very much. But look what it looked like by the early 1990s. And David Jacobs was the creator of Dallas, and he said in Dallas, as far as anybody remembered, everybody said it's not okay to say anything about money, but in Dallas it was okay. He said it became okay to say it's all about money. So therefore, in Dallas, we all kind of watch this city mushroom and get richer and richer. Would you mind reading it, Tom, that
Sure.
way? Because I can't stretch my neck up
That's
to the
fine.
very top enough to see it.
No problem.
Okay.
I will just read the quotes and then you read the context. You say the context.
Okay, great. All right. So, Dallas as the capital of America. Okay, Tom, read what it says.
As of 2024, Dallas is the 6th wealthiest city in the United States and the 22nd wealthiest city in the world. It ranked 4th in the nation for millionaire growth from 2013 to 2023. Henley and Partners of London. Dallas has 68,600 millionaires and 15 billionaires.
Now, that just came out. I was thumbing through my, like Daily Mail and the Washington Post and New York Times that I read every day. And I said, oh my gosh, they're still writing about how rich Dallas is. That's just kind of a perpetual thing. Ever since Larry Hagman was here, they can't talk about much else. Okay, Tom.
JR is symbol of wealth and power. It was just a time when everybody was throwing away money. It was wonderful, except for me. I kept mine. Larry Hagman.
I know. He was serious about it, too. He was going to negotiate for the rest of his life. Okay. The 1980s were the absolute time of prosperity. And as you see here, Nancy Reagan's hairdresser came here and to promote his book, and it was Nouveau is better than no riche at all. And then Woody Allen said about prosperity, money is better than poverty, if only for financial reasons. Okay, it was 1978 when Dallas arrived in Dallas. This was a man named Dan Petty. At that point, he was the president of the Dallas Chamber of Commerce. So Laura Marr Productions went to him because they needed a South Fork and they wanted to have some hospitality and welcoming. And he sent them to a man named Don Mitchell. Well, about half the businessmen in Dallas owned this coffee table book called Profile of Dallas, which were his watercolors of different scenes around Dallas, very idealized. And so they thought he would be the perfect person to get in touch with, to try to find a South Fork and other places that the cast needed. So he was a very earnest man. He said, I will help you. I will do it. So
Can you back up? I was going to read something about David Jacobs.
Well, the first people he went to were Trammell and Margaret Crow, the biggest real estate developer, and he wanted their house to be South Fork. It was down there on Preston Road, right at Armstrong. And so Trammell was okay about it, but Margaret Crow was hesitant, and she kept delaying. So they said, okay, we'll find something else. So then they went to Jess Hay, and he was the head of Lomas and Nettleton Mortgage Company, and his wife said, okay, we'll do it if you will pay for a suite at the Fairmont, because I want to stay. It was a brand new hotel back then. I want to stay at the Fairmont. But Jess said he was not moving to a motel or a hotel, no matter whether it was nice or not. So therefore, they decided to say no. Then they went to Ted and Annette Strauss. As you all know, she later became mayor of Dallas. Always so agreeable. She would have done anything for anybody. So she arranged for them to draw up a check and a contract and let everybody come into the living room. And when Ted got home that night from his banking office, he said, what in the world is going on here? This is chaos. So he tore up the check and the contract right in front of them and said, get out of here. So therefore, Annette Strauss's house was eliminated. Okay, so the next place they went was the Aldrich House on Swiss Avenue. That was taken over by the Dallas County physicians, the Dallas County Medical Society. it was the wives of the doctors. And so they said, oh, yes, we would just love to have you. But then they noticed that the tripods of the crew was scratching their beautiful wood floors, and they started overhearing some of the dialogue. The dialogue didn't sound very savory. It was about affairs and about things that Dallas people, maybe they do it, but they cover them up. But anyway, it sounded like that was something that might give the Aldrich House a risque reputation. So they said no. So Donald Mitchell had to go back to the drawing board again. So you can see that Larry Hagman at that point was, the entire dialogue, the entire scripts was all about chicanery, trickery, affairs, everything. And it all was okay because of this. Because in 1976, there was the biggest scandal. In fact, if it happened again, it would be just as big a scandal as it used to be. And that was Cullen and Priscilla Davis. Priscilla, of course, they lived in Fort Worth, but she was always wearing very, mini skirts and very low-cut necklines. And she played tennis great. She always exercised beautifully. But the nightly news, all of the channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS, every single night at 5:30, they would cut in with more news about the Cullen Davis trials. Well, he was not only accused of killing Priscilla's daughter and shooting Priscilla, but also of murdering her new boyfriend and trying to get the divorce judge killed. So this went on for about 3-4 years. And there wasn't any end to the, that was Stan Farr, that was her boyfriend who got murdered. And that was her daughter, Andrea. I think she was 14. And then there was Priscilla, and she got shot and ended up recovering. So you can see, then when Cullen Davis tried to get the divorce judge murdered and killed also, they just couldn't believe what he was trying to get away with. But that went on all the way up to 1979. So you can see the TV show Dallas came here in 78 to 79, and all this was the prelude because it made it possible for them to write whatever they wanted to. It didn't make any difference. Okay, here's, we're trying to find houses for the characters and for the cast. Okay, here's all the cast right there in the basic form. You can see all the names. And they were staying at the North Park Inn. I don't know if y'all remember the North Park Inn. It was it had even a helipad. It was right across from North Park, had lots of parking lots all over, and it was like a big inn that they closed down. And at night, see the dog way up there? That's how they guarded their premises. That dog, they let it go all over the back and the front and down the halls, and it scared the Dallas people to death. And so they were dying to get out of the North Park Inn. I mean, Miss Ellie barricaded herself in her room at sunset and would never come out until it was the next morning. So Marianne Smith was always a really good friend of a lot of actors. Like she had gone back to the Margot Jones Theater and all that. And so she had a good friend named David Healy. They went out to dinner one night, and on the way back, he said, well, my friend Larry Hagman is in town. I'd like to go by and see him. So they went to the North Park Inn, and he opened the door, and it was like a Turkish Casbah. It was like everything was flags and a whole altar. I mean, it looked like somebody's Middle Eastern cult religion gone wrong, because Larry Hagman always loved anything that was really, really fanciful and kind of exotic. So he had turned his whole little hotel room into like a Turkish makeshift temple of some sort, and you can see he had unusual lamps and everything. And then he decided, oh, I need to bail out. I need to go rent a regular house in Dallas. Well, have y'all ever heard of Harold Simmons? And his brother was Doug Simmons. And Harold was really doing a lot of investment opportunity developing in Atlanta. And he wanted his brother to go to Atlanta. And they had just bought a house and remodeled it. So they were putting it up on the market for $6,000 a month. So Larry Hagman filled out a lease contract and said, I want to take your house. And they said, no, because we just think all you are is the pilot from I Dream of Jeannie. They didn't think he was going to be there for 10 minutes. And when he said, oh no, but we have this other TV show, Dallas, and they said, that doesn't sound like it's going to go over either. We do not want to get involved in anything like that. So they leased their house to an oil man who went bust the next year, and they always said that Larry Hagman would have been a much better prospect. So this is what they finally ended up with, and I had a really good friend named Lois Foles, and she was one of my main sources. She knew everything that was going on with the whole cast of Dallas because first Patrick Duffy and then Larry Hagman, they were both renting her house. And this house was kind of a California contemporary house. It was over in the Bluffview area, lots of trees, looked just exactly what Larry would have liked from either Colorado or California or Malibu. And so that's what he rented. There were other people that she'd had stay there too. For example, Rock Hudson and, a lot of people who were at the Dallas Summer Musicals, Phyllis Diller, Sandy Dennis. She used her house as kind of a temporary inn for a lot of stars. And even Paul McCartney one time stayed there, and he opened up all the French doors, and all the neighbors got to hear all of his songs from Wings across America. So anyway, it was a very unusual house. And one time, Lois's son was coming home. He said, oh my gosh, there's a Gray Line bus here. So the word had gotten out that JR was there, and so it became part of the touring of Dallas. So you can see, look very much like what you might think Larry would like out in California. Okay, so at the same time, they were trying to find South Fork. Well, you would think that that would be fairly easy, a lot of ranches around Dallas, but that was hard too. Nothing about this was very easy. So Don Mitchell went around and he found this house, which was owned by the Box family. And Mrs. Box said, well, you can use the outside of our house, but we don't want you inside. And so you have to find a different house for the inside. And they had used it for Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Remember that movie? So surely Dallas would be a little bit sweeter than that. And they had to use another house over on Park Lane for the interiors. So they had to duplicate them exactly on the LA sound stages so they could keep filming when Dallas went out of town. So you can see it was owned by Jackie and Bruce Calder with Nancy Hammond in the middle up there. And that's what it looked like on the outside. It might have made a good South Fork, but they'd already found one. And then they went scouting for office buildings. So the whole city of Dallas looked like it had just gone through a major restoration project. You can see Ian Pei had just designed Fountain Place. So that's where they made some of the offices, and then that's the Trauma Crow building. So some of the other, I think Sue Ellen's office was there. And then you had Bryan Tower. So every major building in Dallas had offices in Dallas that were associated. And there was even a ranch called the Southern Cross Ranch in Forney that became Clayton and Dusty Farrow's ranch. So every place you can imagine. It was all turned into sets for Dallas. Okay, so the shooting would just pop up. Nobody knew where they were going to be or when they were coming. So one time at this hair salon, everything was going very easily. Everything was okay. And so this girl was having foil. Her hair was getting frosted with foil, and they'd just taken almost all the foil out. And suddenly, she looked outside the window. She said, "Oh my gosh, there's crabs, red crabs." So she got up out of the chair and went rushing out after Steve Canale and had the sun's rays glistening after the foil. So obviously the shot had to be redone. And then 2 years in a row, they went to Presbyterian Hospital. And everybody knows the doctors usually stay inside a hospital. They don't go out on the parking lot. But the first year, they were so disruptive that they said, well, if you ever come back here, you have to be on the parking lot. Well, that first year, they would kind of designate a hall that they wanted to do the shooting in. And people that had IVs in their arms, they would start wheeling their little machinery up and down the halls, trying to get into the filming of Dallas. So they said, no, next year you have to be out in the parking lot. So they had 15 extras as doctors out in the parking lot. Okay, so now we found our permanent South Fork, and here's Larry Hagman in front of it. Well, it was not a very big house, but it would do. It was in Parker, and it was, 3,000 square feet. And Larry was an absolute fanatic about cigarette smoking. And he said, I cannot stand to be inside this South Fork because Mrs., what's her name? Mrs. J.R. Duncan, she smokes. And they would argue and argue about how much she could smoke and how she was going to put out her cigarettes and how she was going to fumigate the air. So that was a big thing that Larry was just obsessed about. It reeked of tobacco. And one of the things that everybody thought was, how realistic is it to have the South Fork when, as Dottie Heiser would say, she went to the Pink House, and she said, you don't think we all live in a smaller house as South Fork, do you? And you don't think we only have one servant and one phone that we keep in the living room? And you don't think we all live together, do you? So some of the things about the script, seem to pertain more to people that might have been in a kind of a lower area than what South Fork was supposed to be. And the ladies in Dallas, to tell the truth, they wore real jewelry. And poor Linda Gray, she was always trying to get the wardrobe department of Lorimar to upgrade her jewelry. She finally got a man named George Miguel, who was at Lou Lattimore, and he supplied all of her jewelry for about 10 years. And I've been trying to find him. I don't know where he went, but anyway. Then there were a lot of other discrepancies that had to do with South Fork. For example, one of the early scripts said, well, we found all this oil at South Fork. Well, if South Fork was in Dallas County or Collin County, there had never been any oil found, either one. And somebody said, well, if there was any oil discovered, it must have been spilled out of a can of Valvoline motor oil, because that was the only possible oil that could be there. And then they had a hurricane. I mean, I remember being indignant about that hurricane. When I first started listening to Dallas, I said, well, don't they know that we don't have hurricanes all the way up here in Dallas? I mean, we have storms like we had today. We had a big thunderstorm, but we don't have any hurricanes as such. We have a lot of tornadoes, unfortunately, but we're 700 miles from the Texas coast. So it turned out that David Jacobs, the creator and the writer, had never been to Dallas when he started writing the script. And he later said he probably should have come to Dallas to see what was what before he started. But anyway, hindsight. So as Dallas got more popular, the whole Parker, which was a sleepy little community, a farmland area, it suddenly started getting clogged up with cars and buses and everything you can imagine. So J.R. Duncan found himself getting sued, and there was a couple down the road named Mr. and Mrs. John Barber, and they claimed that he had caused them to lose the peaceful enjoyment of their property as defined by Texas law, because Hogg Road was totally subject to traffic jams morning till night. And J.R. Duncan, whose first two letters are J.R., he got the Venus bonnet that he could be just like J.R. Ewing, and that was that he could start selling his property in 1 square foot parcels. So he got it all surveyed, and this is an actual deed to 1 square foot of South Fork. See down there where you see the gates and you've got the whole seal and everything that you could take to your county surveyor and show that you owned it. Well, everything, right at the beginning, it was all, number 6, everything finally ended up being number 1. And the thing is, it wasn't number 1 immediately. It took about 2 years. But then it stayed number 1 all the way up to about 1983. And then it was shoved aside a little bit by Dynasty. At that point, the TV show Dynasty in Denver started being a big competitor. But for about those 2-3 years, from 1978 up to about 1981, Dallas had free reign over the TV airwaves. I mean, it was, when you talk about the 1980s in Dallas, it's really this late 1970s period into the early, up to about 1982, that was the most prosperous. So it was rated number 1 in 80, 81, and 83, number 2 in 82 and 84, and then it stayed in the top 10 all the way from 79 up to 1986. So, have you all ever been to the Cattle Barons Ball? Well, as you know, that's one of the most rollicking, and they find so many ways for you to spend money at the Cattle Barons Ball. There's just no way that you can come out of there. If you have, $10,000 in your bank account, you probably will already be in debt by 2000, because there's a lot of ways to spend money at the Cattle Barons Ball. Like one of the first years, they had gold-encrusted belt buckles, and Clint Murkison he was buying those like it was a collection item. And so a lot of people that went to the Cattle Barons Ball, they were there to buy. And so the Dallas Stars started going there. It had been founded in 1973, but I don't know if y'all remember, back in the 70s, you had the influence of Kim Dawson at the Apparel Mart, you had Neiman Marcus. A lot of people did not dress in denim or anything like that. They only mainly wore silk dresses like Neiman's featured in their second floor department, or they made it where, they thought, well, Fort Worth is where you want to go if you want to wear a Stetson hat. We don't do that very much in Dallas. So they were always kind of trying to get formal in Dallas. A lot of the men said, why in the world are you having all these all these formal dinners? We don't like them very much, and we want to wear jeans. why don't you come up with something where we can be comfortable? So they finally came up with the idea of the Cattle Barons Ball and started it in 1973. So we had this big Western outfit. Okay, so the ball went through 73 up to 79, and for the very first time, somebody from Dallas showed up, and that was Larry Hagman. And so they took pictures of him over at Willow Bend Polo and Hunt Club, and they had pictures posed where he had leashes to a herd of goats, and everybody thought that was so great that they couldn't help but spend money. And so the revenue jumped 50% up to $111,000. Then Larry actually had himself auctioned off for dinner, and it was Ted Clifford that paid $3,500. And of course, they hammed it up with the auctioneer. They said he was a vegetarian, he would eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Don't worry, he would be, just fine. You could eat with him and enjoy your dinner. But anyway, so Ted Clifford did that. Another person that was a model for one of their style shows was Charlie Rose. And there were other furs that were worn by Marianne and Roger Staubach and other well-known people around Dallas. So they had a whole fur fashion show at one of the early Cattle Barons fashion shows. So anyway, okay. Then as Tom was talking about earlier, here came Who Shot JR. The whole world was in suspense from March the 21st, 1980 to November the 21st, 1980. And director Leonard Katzman, I took that picture because I was at the Oil Barons Ball, and he would always kind of be quiet and kind of hide away. But anyway, he said the idea of ending season 2 with a shooting of JR was bold. He said, we thought, what the hell, shoot him, and we'll figure out later who did it. So Larry was not pleased. Larry Hagman was not pleased. He didn't like guns, and he didn't like the idea of the shooting. And he suggested that JR walk into an elevator shaft at Ewing Hall Oil and fall 15 floors down. And an alternate cliffhanger would be a suicide attempt by Sue Ellen. She fixes herself the ultimate nightcap, goes off to kiss her baby goodbye, enter JR drunk, in need of a hair of the dog, and spies Sue Ellen's deadly cocktail of barbiturates, and he downs it in one go. And Sue Ellen sees all, does nothing, returns to baby John and rocks his cot. Shock, horror, credits roll. But the producers thought it would be better to shoot him. So that's what happened. Okay. So Who Shot JR went on for an entire year, and that was because Larry thought it was a wonderful idea to renegotiate his contract. He had started out, I think, at about $35,000, but he got it up to $78,000 per episode, plus the royalties from J.R. Ewing merchandise. He said, I thought that was a good time to ask for a raise. It was the biggest gamble of my life. I knew if it didn't work, I'd never work in this business again. So when he was in London, he and his wife, were in London. They went to a command performance. They also went to the Royal Ascot. So they ran into the Queen Mother, and she said, would you tell me who shot you, JR? And he said, I said, no, ma'am, not even you, because he didn't even know who shot himself. If he told her one thing, it would have been wrong, because he had no idea who actually did it. And in fact, they kind of staged shootings with Larry and just about everybody in the entire cast to put them into the vault so that if they changed their mind, they'd still have a Who Shot JR that was viable and okay for everybody. So when he came back, he felt like he was richer than JR himself. He'd been making $15,000, went up to $78,000, later went up to $200,000 an episode. He used to say that shooting the show was long and boring, and it makes you a millionaire. So to pass time on the set, he drank champagne just about every day from morning till night until he had to go back to his motel room. Okay, so the J.R. Bucks, he and Mai would go out to Marianne and Gene Smith's ranch, and right after he got back, they were giving out these wads of J.R. Bucks like they were going out of style, and all of them had a picture of J.R. in a 10-gallon hat and the serial number 9211931, which was his birthday, which was September 21st, 1931. And so he said he was also running for president. If elected, I will run. If elected, I will serve. And he said, of course, Ronald Reagan at that point was also running for president. And so J.R. said it was okay to be a protest because the other traditional candidates, the president is as much of an actor as any of the rest of us. So that was his opinion of Reagan. And he would go out to the Lake Ray Hubbard and set off fireworks along with Gene Smith, and he said they reminded him of the Korean War. Okay, so here's one of their big Who Shot JR? Find out tonight. So the number of people that watched that episode grew from about 90 million average to about 650 million people in 57 countries. That was the highest rated American broadcast aired, at least up to that time. And the answer of who did it was Kristen, Mary Crosby, who was the daughter of Bing Crosby. And since he was the son of Broadway star Mary Martin, she explained it this way: Bing Crosby's daughter killed Peter Pan's son. Okay, so then the Cattle Barons Committee said, well, why don't we have an actual ball of Cattle Barons at South Fork, and let's have it filmed to be an episode for the show. So nobody had ever been able to get inside South Fork, so they thought, well, we'll just charge enough to make it worthwhile, and the Duncans were okay with that. So anyway, so Sue Ellen was going to be the chairman of the Daughters of the Alamo, and everybody in town, 2 months before this thing was going to happen, everybody was buying so many tickets that you couldn't get another ticket for anything. So it was all sold out. And Linda Gray's legs, I don't know if y'all knew this, but anyway, her legs were actually the ones in the poster of The Graduate. So she was still an extremely attractive woman. I think at that point she was only maybe in her early 40s or late 30s. And these were the chairman of this South Fork Ball. That was Melinda Wynn and Francis Shepard. Francis's husband, Philip Shepard, had been an architect for the mansion. And then Melinda's husband was an oil man, and they lived on Lakeside Drive. And so they were just going to have the biggest, most wonderful ball that for Cattle Barons that had ever happened. So all these barons hired limousines, and you had a whole, fleet of a parade of limousines coming down the Parker, the main roads of Parker, and down Hog Road. So they were Melinda's outfit was by Bob Mackey, and then almost everybody there had outfits that were either from Cheesy Cream Cheese, I think it was, from Los Angeles for $2,000. I mean, the money was just poured into what everybody was going to wear. And then Caroline Hunt, who's back then Shokoff, loaned her fleet, Pumpkin Air, because she liked pumpkins. So those helicopters flew the Dallas Stars to the ranch. And they were all going to get out and Robin Leach with Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. He was going to film everybody, but when he and his entourage and crew tried to get into the ranch, the guards blocked him. And he said, but I've got to go and take pictures of all the stars getting down from the helicopter. And they said, no, you're not. So they sent him out on the roads and told him he was not welcome at South Fork. He was not happy. So anyway, as the night progressed, that was probably about 8 o'clock, you can see at South Fork, the sun started going down. Everything was still okay. They had like an Indian powwow kind of thing. You could kind of see the people in their feathers, and you could hear their chants and everything. Well, it was about 8:30 when everybody was in the dining tent, and Charlie McLean, the intro singer, started singing, and then the microphone sputtered, and the lights flickered, and the whole South Fork Ranch electricity went out. Every single light, and there were 2 tents outside, one for the men, one for the women, and there was not a single light in either one. All you got was moonlight. Fortunately, they left the tent kind of open at the top, so all the people were, they would go out there and then come back and just grope their way, and most of them were wearing very expensive boots or really great shoes, and it had rained all day. So they had put straw down on top of the ground, and all those people with all their $2,000 boots were getting mud caked like 2 inches all around their shoes. So they sent up to McKinney for a generator. It didn't get there till 11 o'clock, and it provided just enough voltage for a spotlight and minor little amplification, because we had Johnny Cash and June Carter, and he required a lot of amps, a lot of sound, and that wasn't coming. So they said, well, this is the first time that Johnny Cash has used an acoustical guitar in the last 20 years. He couldn't use an electric guitar, and he said, it's good not to have things go all right. It's good to remember where you've been so you don't lose track of where you're going in the world. So June Carter said, all these people are covered in couth. We got to really entertain all these people. So they did everything they could to make everybody happy. So you can see all those boots were in the mud, and but the American Cancer Society was elated because the ball raised more than $400,000. That was great. Okay, so out at South Fork, they started having more and more conferences, tours. Everybody in the world wanted to go out there. They had conventioneers, and it just became something that was unmanageable. So all this was happening, in 78 and 79. But there were 12 things that led up to this that set the stage. And this is where I think the people that study Dallas, if they don't realize all the other things that were happening, this didn't just happen in a vacuum. The first thing was that oil shot up between 1978 and 1980. It shot up 250%, from $14.02 up to $36. And in 1972, it had only been $2.48. So you can see a lot of people were getting real rich just from basic old ordinary oil around here. And then in 1979, suddenly in Iran, there was the Ayatollah Khomeini that took over in Iran from the Shah of Iraq, or Shah of Iran. And Dallas was profoundly affected. The Empress and the Shah were exiled on January 16th, 1979. And a lot of Iranian students had chosen to study in Texas because of the oil economy, and they thought it was the most like their native land. So an issue of Iran Times cited statistics in early '79 that 1.6 billion had been taken out of Iran by private investors within the previous 3 weeks. A lot of these people sent their money to Dallas. And do you remember all the restaurants that suddenly were built or open, and they were mainly controlled by Iranians? There were, Jack Ektiar had Oz, which later was named Baron de Rothschild, and then Avanti Euro Bistro on McKinney and in Fountain Place. And he was the son of the former police chief of the Shah of Iran. So, and then there was Tony Terrazati, and his partner is Arjan Tabi, and Maurice Bagheri had Stone Trail and Papillon, and then Abbas Bagheri had Enclave and Pompano. Well, all that was pure money straight from Iran. So Jack Ektiar told me, see all these waiters around here? He said, they're not really working here for money. They just need something to do, and they want to get acclimated, because he said a lot of the waiters had so much money they could easily afford to buy 10 of his restaurants because of all those billions of dollars that were being shipped out. And when the Iranians would bring their money over here, they would want to partner with somebody in Texas so that they would have less of a possibility of losing their investment. So here came but Gaith Pharaoh, and he was one of the wealthiest of all the Saudis. So he partnered with Clyde Jackson and with Toddy Lee Wynn, and Toddy Lee Wynn's wife, Jackie Wynn, who's still a good friend. And so they went sailing on the Gaith Pharaoh yacht a lot. And then they built the Plaza of the Americas with a big skating rink in the middle of it. And that was a really big complex. Later, I think it was the Marriott Center. But you can see the entire skating rink was a real draw for a lot of young people. Then, okay, just a second. Then we had the richest man from Saudi Arabia, Adnan Khashoggi. He was an arms dealer. Do y'all ever remember his name? Well, it was in 1985. His private jet landed at Love Field, and he went to Laura Hunt's house, and he brought along Muhammad Ali, Philippe Junot, who'd been married to Princess Caroline in Monaco, and Stuart Copeland of the rock band The Police. And then everybody from Laura's house, we all went to the Rio Room, which is on Travis. It was the back part of Nostromo. Did any of y'all ever go to Nostromo, the nightclub? Well, anyway, so you can see Adnan Khashoggi's wife over there. She had at least $3 million worth of sapphires, rubies. I've never seen any one person that had that much jewelry on. And we kept dancing till 3 a.m. Okay, the second thing that happened was I was at the Dallas Morning News about my second month there, and I thought, gosh, this is fun. I was right in the middle of the city desk, and I answered the phone right before Thanksgiving, and they said, this is Baylor Hospital. We want to inform you that H.L. Hunt has just died. And so I thought, gosh, this is really big. So I called over to Bob Miller, who was the city editor, and I said, Bob, H.L. Hunt has just died. He went, oh, holy da-da-da. So anyway, everybody in the whole newsroom got involved in writing the obituary about H.L. Hunt. And so it took about 3 years for the heirs to get their money. And of course, the first family was Bunker, Herbert, Lamar, Margaret, and Caroline. And so the children finally got control, and Bunker and Herbert, and I've also read Lamar was involved. Anyway, they started investing in silver. Lamar also in sports, and Margaret and Caroline in hotels. So the silver speculation during the last 9 months of 1979, Bunker and Herbert made profits of $2 billion to $4 billion in silver. Their holdings were said to be 100 million ounces or 6.25 million pounds, and silver futures contracts rose from $11 an ounce in September '79 to $50 an ounce in January 1980. I never forget going to get my poor little sterling silver thing and wagging it to the bank and putting it into my little vault, because I said, oh, what if somebody comes and steals all my sterling silver? And I still haven't used it. I keep it in a drawer. I never use that sterling silver. For some reason, it's in the back of my mind that it'll go way up and maybe come down, but too bad, I just don't use it. So anyway, so then there was a Silver Thursday, which was on March the 27th, 1980. That was about the same as the Black Friday for the Depression, and that was the steepest fall in silver prices, which led to panic on the commodity and futures exchanges, and so it went all the way back down to $11 an ounce. So it was a great gamble, but it didn't quite work out. Let's see. So here I am with Margaret Hill there, and then Ruth and Ruth Sharp Altshuler, and her husband, Dr. Ken Altshuler. And Margaret had founded the Garden of the Gods Club in Colorado Springs in 1949. So Caroline probably was daydreaming for many years, what will I do with my money when I inherit it? So she thought, hotels. So the very first thing she could do was she started by buying a 1920s mansion on Gillespie Street near Turtle Creek and built the Crescent Hotel and Office across the street. Then she bought the Remington in Houston, the Hana Maui in Hawaii, the Bel Air, and managed the Lanesboro in London, La Semana in the Caribbean, and the Carlisle in New York. I mean, she didn't just get cheap properties, all of hers. And I was so lucky. I knew Caroline really well. And she'd say, Nancy, would you like to stay? Whatever. So I stayed everywhere. I stayed at the Bel Air Hotel and the Carlisle in New York and everything. She was all, and then she would see me afterwards. She'd say, what do you think of it? Did you enjoy it? Did you have a good time there? I said, yes, of course. So anyway, the mansion on Turtle Creek, she hired the 21 Club consultants from New York City to manage it. And I interviewed Sheldon Tannen, who was with the 21 Club family. And so it opened in February 12th, '79, and became the hottest place in Dallas. And Caroline took very, very personal pleasure in trying to make sure all of her hotels were just as much as if people had been in her own house. So you can see the 21 Club there. And first they hired Wolfgang Puck, and later Dean Fearing, and it had a very strict dress code, which was unlike California. Like when James Garner went there one time, they told him that he'd have to wear a tie, and he said, well, I'll just buy the place. And then in '82, Giorgio Armani was really kind of upset that one of his assistants, who had on a turtleneck sweater, they put a tie around it. And he said, you should have seen it. It was just hanging on. It looked ridiculous. So Armani was not impressed with our dress code. And then Wayne Broadwell was the main maitre d' for most of the years. And he always took pride in knowing everybody. Well, if you went to the mansion, there was kind of a pecking order. And inside the main dining room, you had, the banquettes. Then you had the little small tables. And then the people that didn't count at all, the ones that looked like a hippie, they got seated out on the terrace. Well, that's where he seated Michelle Pfeiffer. So he seated her out on the terrace, and the next thing you knew, he noticed that people were getting up from their chairs and tables and going out on the terrace, going like that. So anyway, he said, well, you can't know everybody. And besides, she was dressed like a hippie. So anyway, and then Steve Jobs was turned away in 1989. He tried to bring an associate for late night dessert and at the mansion, but he was wearing jeans and a T-shirt, and they had to refuse entry to Steve Jobs. So people were kind of getting used to the new prices, and this is J.M. Hager, whose company, Hager Slacks. A lot of men wear Hager Slacks. Well, he went to the mansion, and he ordered Dover Sole, and he said, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. Why in the world is this so expensive? And the waiter said, well, they had to fly it all the way from Britain, to make it fresh. And he said, well, next time, let it fly tourist class. So, okay, the next reason that Dallas suddenly just erupted at almost the same time as the TV show was that we suddenly started winning the Super Bowl again. And as you know, I mean, that's just about the best publicity you can ever get. We had won it in 1971, then it didn't work out so great, but in 1978, we were back, and Dallas won 27, Denver 10, and Roger Staubach and Craig Morton had kind of a long-standing feud because they had been the co-quarterbacks the first time. So anyway, Tom Landry was still the coach, and so it became a real big cause that Dallas was becoming America's team. You can see we only won the Super Bowl 5 times, in 72, 78, and then 3 years in the 90s, and that's it. So at the very same time, this 1979 was a year to remember because it was also the year that we opened 2 of Dallas's biggest, most futuristic buildings. The Dallas City Hall opened in 78, and also the Reunion Tower. Imagine all these things opening at the very same time. So they were just perfect to be used on the show Dallas. Then, in 1979, American Airlines decides they're going to move their headquarters to Dallas. So they came from New York City here in 79, and then Norman Brinker, between 76 and 1980, was the chairman of the United States Polo Association. And he had a lot of royal people and very famous polo players coming to Willow Bend. Then, all across town, suddenly there was a discovery of Southwestern cuisine, and so the mansion on Turtle Creek hired Dean Fearing, but this was Stephen Piles that I'd known ever since he was at the Bronx Cafe over on Cedar Springs. I mean, he was a great cook, but he got more and more into Southwest. Okay, the very same time, we had about a dozen wealthy widows that their husbands all died about the same time, and they started being philanthropists, like for UT Southwestern. So you had Lupe Murkison, Nancy Hammond, and then you had Effie Kane and Virginia Linthicum. And all these people were giving money to all the institutions around Dallas. And you can see Effie Kane over there. They had kind of in 1962, a little game where they balanced candles on their heads. Well, anyway, she ended up giving $105 million to UT Southwestern, and she knew that she was getting Alzheimer's. So all that $105 million is still producing more than $5.5 million a year for Alzheimer's, even though she's been dead since 1999. I think that's a pretty good success story. And then Stanley Marcus, he sold to Broadway Hale, And all of the Neiman Marcus stores all around the country, the new ones, they all sold this book called Quest for the Best. And then we inaugurated the Dallas Mayor's Ball, and Robert Folsom, who had established Reunion Arena, he wanted all the ambassadors to know that even though Houston had all the consul generals, we wanted their business too. So every year I would go to interview all the ambassadors. And then Trammell Crow started trying to get the Republican convention here in 1984 and succeeded very well. And there I am, right there, right in the middle. That was when the Texas delegation voted for Reagan. So then little things happened, like South Fork burned in 1987, the first South Fork. And then Joan Collins, she said that the 80s were the last heyday of glamour. And when she ran into Larry Hagman one time, he said, "Have you tried going to Europe lately? Our shows are so popular, you can't even leave your hotel room. I tell you, we are the most famous people in the world." So it went on that way all through. This was the Hyatt Regency where we had the first Oil Barons Ball. And there I am over there. There's Martha Taylor, Wade Goudreau, Andy Hansen. We all got all dressed up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I always loved gold dresses, you can tell, and from the 80s. So we all had to get there really early. Here I am with...
Can you tell them a little bit about who Andy Hansen was?
Oh, just a second. Say it again, Tom, I'm sorry.
Can you tell them a little bit about who Andy Hansen was?
Andy Hansen. Tell them about Andy Hansen.
Oh, Andy. He and I were like a partnership, because I'd known Andy even when I was at the Dallas Morning News, because he was always helping me. He'd always say, "Look over there, you should talk to that person." Well, finally, when I joined the Times Herald, which was in 1982, he became like a source, because he knew everybody. And I'd say, "Who's that person over there?" Well, he would tell me everything about everybody. He knew where the skeletons were buried for 2 or 3 decades. And he had been the photographer during the Kennedy assassination. He developed Bob Jackson's photo of Lee Harvey Oswald that day. So he was usually back in the darkroom. But, during certain huge events, Andy was always front and center, and everybody loved Andy. And he was just, he was everywhere. He always enjoyed being at every single party and always was helpful. So anyway, he dressed up in the tuxedo, and we went to the Oil Barons Ball, and it was just, Miss Ellie had just lost her husband, so they were fixing her up with the one that was played by Dale, what was his name? I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, so they were fixing her up with a date. And we actually had real jewels that somebody had gotten for us. We wanted to feel special, but everybody was like, "Who cares?" We could have worn jeans for all they cared about. They just wanted us to show up at the Oil Barons Ball dance, have on a really pretty dress that looked like it actually could have been worn at a Dallas party, and then leave. So, but later at the end, we got to really hobnob with most of the stars. So you can see. Here's Linda Gray with Yvonne Crum and Martha Taylor. And there's Dale Robertson, who played the boyfriend of Miss Ellie. And so he was the love interest. There I am with Linda and Wade Goudreau. And then there's Larry And he was really a good sport about posing with all the extras. And here I am. Well, at the end of the 2 days, we finally just kind of let our hair down. And Larry said, anybody want to sit on my lap and get your picture taken? And we were all like, yeah, yeah. So I sat on his lap. That was way before those Me Too days, you know. And then here I am with Patrick Duffy, and there's Ken Kercheval. And then later I interviewed, Ken Kercheval collected antiques. So I interviewed him at the Tri-Delta Antique Show. And here I am with Susan Howard. And so there kept being outside dramatics. There was like a drama of the regular show, but there were all these other things that were happening, like the entire Eugene Smith family got on the cover of this Swiss magazine as being the true, barons of Dallas, because everybody that would come over here, they'd want to know which family, for real, that the Ewings were patterned after. And then poor Patrick Duffy, his parents got murdered in Montana. They had a bar, and somebody came into the bar and shot his parents. So anyway, that was this very tragic thing that happened. And then Mary Martin, who was Larry Hagman's mother, she and Janet Gaynor were in San Francisco, and they were in a traffic accident with a cab, and ended up with 2 fractured ribs and pelvis and lung. And Janet Gaynor was in the hospital for a very long time and died later. And Mary Martin's press agent also died. Okay, so this is the next thing that happened. Right here at Lois Foltz's house, you can see the little staircase over here. Well, Patrick Duffy was renting that house kind of earlier than Larry. Anyway, they found an intruder right there, kind of couching right there at the staircase. Then Larry decided to move over to this other house, and that was in 1983. And the owner of it was a producer. He was kind of a mogul, but he was a producer, and he was out in Los Angeles. So Larry and Mai were staying there, and it was just at the end of the season. And suddenly, from Los Angeles, they found out that the owner of that house, who was Henry Kyle, he was murdered by his son, Ricky Kyle. And that was a huge scandal out in L.A. And so Larry immediately moved out of the house. He had it guarded by police. And you can see over there, that's my story about the whole thing that got in the New York Post on the front page. It said, Dallas stars living in fear because Linda Gray had also checked into the mansion, and there was a stalker who got out of the elevator on her floor. So it looked like both Dallas main stars were getting stalked. And Richard Grant, who was Larry's agent, bless him, he tried to get me fired. I'd just been at the Times Herald since 1982, and he said, she shouldn't have put that in about Larry and, my security. And they said, well, here, what can we do as a compromise? So they had me talk to Mai for about 30 minutes on the phone, and she said, well, we're just really worried about our security because everybody knows that some movie stars are targeted. And I said, well, I waited till you all went back to California. And she said, well, next time just wait a little longer. So we came to very good terms. But there's the front cover of the New York Post over there. So anyway, all right, Tom, this goes on for a long time because I interviewed 450 celebrities. I'll show you. There I'm with Henry Kissinger, Alexander Haig. There's John Glenn. There's Edward Teller. There's Carl Sagan. That was Roddy McDowell. All those people I interviewed.
You got to tell us about Audrey Hepburn.
Well, and I was also Frank Sinatra's guest at the Reagan inauguration in 1985. I was there in their box and they're dancing with them and all that. It was a really wonderful life back then. So,
I wanted to hear about Audrey Hepburn.
about who?
Audrey Hepburn.
Audrey. Audrey came here, I think it was 1991, and she, like a lot of the people, she would come to the USA Film Festival, but she also had her own cause that she wanted to have benefited also. In her case, it was UNICEF, because she'd been kind of an orphan during World War II, and she wanted all the children to be protected. So she came here and said that she would make an appearance, but only if UNICEF got half the proceeds from the USA Film Festival gala that year. So they were happy about that. So we all got to meet and, congratulate Audrey Hepburn. And Martin Giraud was living here then, and Martin, of course, had been the producer of Breakfast at Tiffany's. So he was really responsible for her getting her job as Holly Golightly. And so they had a big reunion, and he said he was really responsible for her being in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And then later, I got to interview George Papard, who was the male in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and also Patricia Neal, who was the woman who was kind of George Papard's, gave him money, and was married and whatever. Anyway, so it was a sort of a sordid plot, but I got to meet them all. And here again, every time, about once a year, we'd go to the mansion. This is behind glass. That's why it's such a blurry thing. So I kind of went out several times with Frank Sinatra Jr., and when I'd go out to Los Angeles, he would take me to different restaurants, and he decided that Dallas and Texas was really the third coast, and that if he could publicize me enough, he would make me like into the Dorothy Manners or Hedda Hopper or Luella Parsons of the Middle America. So he would introduce me to people that had the same kind of job, and we'd go to the Beverly Hills Hotel, to the Polo Lounge, and he'd introduce me to different people. And he was just extremely nice. The Sinatras were very, very nice, kind people, unlike what you might think.
You got to tell us about Patricia Neal.
Oh, Patricia Neal. Well, she was a real good friend of Lynn Maroney. Lynn Maroney was the wife of James Maroney from the Dallas Morning News. And so they had such a close friendship that she would come here pretty often. And her husband was Roald Dahl, and he was a writer. And I think at some point they got a divorce. It's been a long time. I'd have to go back in my old clippings. But anyway, she had that really strong personality that you saw in HUD. Remember the movie HUD? And a lot of other movies where she would kind of play the strong, kind of domineering woman.
That was my question. Was she the same in real life as she was in HUD?
Say it again, John.
Was her personality like she depicted, like she portrayed in movies?
Oh, Patricia Neal? Pretty much the same. I found that a lot of the movie stars were pretty much the same in real life as they were on the screen. Yes, they were actors and they said lines that they wouldn't have said normally, but they had pretty much the character ingrained inside, and so they became the part. But Patricia Neal was such a good friend of Lynn Maroney that, when I was working for the Morning News, naturally I was very thrilled that Jim and Lynn Maroney had me interviewing one of their prize people that they kept bringing back to Dallas.
I think Frank Sinatra Jr. was right. She was the Hedda Hopper of Middle America. Questions, comments, protests. Before we take any questions, can you give a plug for David Wu? I wouldn't have gotten David Wu if it hadn't been for her. Tell us about David Wu.
Well, there was about 10 photographers at the Morning News that I worked with constantly. The society photographer was Joe Laird, and he was amazing. He was so in shape that he would go on a motorcycle to Alaska every summer, and he talked to his wife into going with him. So she would be on the back of their motorcycle and go all the way up to Alaska and then come back, and he'd come back looking like $1 million with a tan and, white hair. He was amazing. So each one of the photographers was really their own individual person, and they all had, like David Wu, and let's see, who's his partner? Anyway, they put out a book called Texas Woman, and they invited me to be one of them, but the Morning News wouldn't let me. That was like about...
Shame on them.
That was about, the Morning News was afraid that, you'd lose whatever reputation you still had if you posed for any of the other photographers and got included in a coffee table book. So I was not in there, but I had a lot of friends that were, and they still think that was one of the highlights of their entire photography career, that they were taking very beautiful pictures that they now have on their, the wall of their den or their living room or whatever. They were great. Some of them, there was like Priscilla Davis was in a hot tub, Liz Carpenter was in a hot tub down in Austin. They pushed the limit every once in a while, but most of them were pretty much in good taste.
Nancy, why don't you have a seat while we take questions?
Would you like to sit while there's a Q&A?
What's that? Oh, yeah. Sit down over here?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Questions, comments, or protest? This is the library. Say what you want. By the way, this is the closest to royalty I've ever been. You have a question.
Yeah.
I really have a question,
sit
but
down.
I was the general manager of South Fork for the last 20 years.
She was the chairman of
So
South
a
Fork
whole
for
lot
the
of
last 20
this
years.
has just
Oh, my
been
goodness.
nostalgic and amazing for me. And I will have all of our tour guides watching it. I am not there. The ranch was sold. But there's still a lot of really good people there. So I really am excited that you were here and told us all about all of it. I did the Cattle Barons Ball for 10 years. It was really amazing. It was amazing.
We might have to have you back. Now, you look like you were on that show, Dallas. Come on, you look like, I've seen you before. Okay, these pictures, one of the ladies in the audience these are with Larry Hagman. I want to tell you something. You had to do everything you could to get a picture with Larry Hagman. I never tried because there were always 100 people ahead of me. Anyways, the lady wanted to share it with us. And, of course, Larry Hagman was from Weatherford, wasn't he?
Where was Larry Hagman from?
Oh, he was from Weatherford.
Weatherford, yes.
Weatherford,
Okay,
Texas.
good. Yeah, yes, good.
Just west of Fort Worth.
Good.
Questions, comments, protests? This is your time to ask an expert. Questions? Comments?
Nancy, who was your favorite person that you interviewed?
Who's your favorite person that you interviewed? And use your mic.
Oh.
Here's your,
There was one person that was so unexpected, Eartha Kitt. I went to her room at the Los Anatole Hotel expecting to spend maybe 20 minutes or something. She was appearing in a show that was a benefit for, I think it was for AIDS. And she sized me up for about 10 minutes. Like, can I trust you? Do I like you? And, I was trying to explain my background. I would tell people a little bit. I was raised on a dairy farm down in San Antonio for 8 years, and sometimes that would kind of loosen people up. They thought, oh, a farmer's daughter, that kind of thing. Then she finally decided she could trust me, and she started talking about what it was like growing up in South Carolina, being out in the woods with all the birds and the wild animals, she said that the black people didn't like her because she was too white, and the white people didn't want to be with her because she was too black. So she had absolutely nobody to be with. And so she would go and talk and sing to the birds. And then finally her family sent her to New York. And when she got up there, she felt like nobody up there accepted her either. And this went on. She danced. She went on. And for 2.5 hours, I interviewed her in her hotel suite. She wanted me to understand everything there was to know about Eartha Kitt as though I were a family member. And she was absolutely amazing. And I never forget, after 2.5 hours being with her, I felt like I knew her really well. And there was something to be able to have the license to ask people any question that you wanted to know about or have answers to. You know, it's like a dream come true, because very few people, know very much about each other. But like I would go and interview, say, Robert Goulet, and then I'd tap into, he'd say, well, I'm very insecure on the stage, and to tell you the truth, I drink a lot. And then he would go into how his wife was trying to get him to drink less and things like that. But also Gordon McGray was like that. So, I would interview people almost like I was a psychotherapist. And, because I could interview them for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And the Times Herald, where I was at that point, the longer my article was and the more insightful and deep it was, the more the editors liked it. So, a lot of people think, well, I was just society editor. Well, I interviewed Carl Sagan for about an hour and a half. I interviewed Edward Teller. One time I went to an event where there were about 8 SMU professors, all scientists, and they said, well, this is Nancy Smith. She's going to interview you, and all of you professors, you be quiet. She's going to ask all the questions. And I didn't even get to bone up on, I knew a little bit about Edward Teller, but I just asked him, was he proud that he had been the father of the hydrogen bomb, and what kind of, what kind of impact did it have on people? How fearful should we be, and all that kind of thing. So anyway, it was an amazing opportunity to be able to interview people that are historical figures now. I got to interview a lot of the presidential families, including Lillian Carter and Barbara Bush, but also Margaret Truman and Nancy Reagan and Julie Nixon Eisenhower. Every time the first of the morning news in the Times Herald, they'd say, oh, well, we need somebody to go up to Washington to the inauguration. Are you available? Yeah, I'm not doing anything else. So I'd go up there and spend 2 weeks in Washington and interviewed all the congressmen and I went inside the White House many times and interviewed I went on the south lawn of the White House. I got invited by Rosalind Carter's social secretary. So, every time I turned around, it was just serendipity. I had no idea what was going to happen. And back when I was first a reporter, I'd only been at the news for about maybe 2 years. I got, investigative reporting was the big thing back then. So I started doing a series on how people's names get on mailing lists. So I became a finalist in investigative reporting at the Katie Awards. And every time somebody says, well, you're nothing but a society editor, I think, I had a very, very varied life in reporting. And I wish, women are very often put down just because, you went to a lot of parties doesn't mean you don't have depth in a lot of other areas. So I was constantly having to defend myself.
Was that because you're a woman?
Say it again?
He asked, was that because you were a woman?
Well, a woman, and I always dressed what you call feminine, I guess. The reason that I got to be the society editor and got sent to a lot of balls and galas and whatever was that I always wore a silk dress to the morning news. A lot of other people just dressed in dungarees or denim or whatever. But, you know, Dallas was a pretty dress-up town back then. And like one day, our editor needed somebody to send to Fort Worth immediately and cover the opening of Richmar Mall, Neiman Marcus. So it was about 4 p.m. She said, "Can you go over to Fort Worth?" And I said, "Sure." So I went over there and I interviewed Van Cliburn and Van Cliburn's mother and Prince, somebody of Russia, Prince, I remember. Anyway, and the photographer came up and he said, "I've got to take a picture fast. Find somebody from Dallas immediately because I need to take this picture back to Dallas and meet the deadline." So I looked around, and the only person I recognized was Annette Strauss. And I said, "Mrs. Strauss, would you mind posing in a picture with somebody here from Fort Worth?" And I didn't really care who it was because the photographer was on me. And I said, "Would you all come over here and pose with her?" And then the photographer went click, 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 and left. And poor Mrs. Strauss, she was like, "Come here, may I call you Nancy?" "Yes." "Well, you know, did you see what they were wearing?" And I said, "I didn't really notice." And she said, "Well, I really think I would prefer not to be in the morning news with those two people from Fort Worth, even though I'm sure they're very nice." They had very abbreviated dresses on. And she said, "I will be your friend for a very long time if you please kill that photo." So I made sure it didn't see the light of day in the morning news, and she called me the next day and she said, "Thank you so much. That means so much to me, and I want to help you in every possible way." Well, she became my mentor. So every time I had any questions about anything, I would call her, and it was because of her that the people at the Dallas Times-Herald decided to hire me to be their columnist in 1982. So it really was she was a wonderful person to me.
I've got to ask you about Margaret Truman.
Say it again, darling. What did it say?
Martha Truman?
Oh, Margaret Truman. She was writing books about mysteries. And so she was in the Adolphus Hotel and in her suite, so I interviewed her there. And she was still smarting. I think there was a critic who had criticized, what was it, her singing or her piano playing, whatever it was. Anyway, it was I think it was a critic from the Washington Post. And several years later, I was at Roger Horchow's a little party he gave for the Friends of WRR, and that man was there playing the piano. And I said, well, he mentioned Margaret Truman. And I said, "Oh, yes, I interviewed Margaret Truman one time, and she was still upset." And he said, "Yes, and her father was really upset. He was going to, take me outside to the back alley and, let me know how he felt about what I said about Margaret." But anyway, Margaret said, well, he was right, that she always thought that she was not a very good pianist or a very good singer. So anyway, people can assess themselves and be true to themselves and be gracious about it at the same time.
Questions back here? Questions?
I just wanted to say hello to Nancy. You are an old friend of our family. My mother was June Jones, and she used to go with Tony Zoppi,
Huh?
who was
Her mother is June
who
Jones.
at one point was
Oh,
an
June Jones.
entertainment columnist for the Dallas Morning News, and you knew my dad, Spalding Jones. So you all were at a lot of the same parties together.
Jones.
I'm Autumn. I'm one of their daughters.
Oh,
This is Autumn.
Autumn, I'm so glad to see you.
We're honored to have you. Any
Oh,
questions,
yeah.
comments?
Spalding was a really good friend of mine.
Nancy was pure gold. I mean, you are. It's wonderful to hear these stories and know that you always took such good notes. We really have such a great history of all these things that have happened in Dallas, and a lot of people that are moving here don't really know, don't have a context for a lot the way a lot of things are, and it's really wonderful to see and to hear these stories and see the pictures, and have you tell the story.
Well, Autumn, was it you that went up in the elevator with your dad and Lee Harvey Oswald that day? I don't remember every detail.
Her father worked in the school book.
Oh, yeah. He worked for Macmillan and Company. I knew him real well. I mean, I knew Spalding very well, and we went to a lot of parties together. And he was so proud of you girls. Summer, Autumn, and I've forgotten the third. But anyway, but he used to tell me that he hung around in the Texas School Book Depository that day, and he had, with his little brownie, he went up to the 6th floor and he took pictures of the boxes up there. And I got him to turn those over to the 6th floor museum here because I thought, well, they were historic, and, you know, he would be sad if he didn't at least try to contribute to their collection.
Nancy, I want to thank you for coming tonight and sharing the pictures and the stories. It's nice to relive the glamour days of Dallas in the 70s and 80s. It's nice to hear it again. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all. I love being here. I think this is a beautiful auditorium. The first time I've ever been here, you can imagine what a shock it was when Tom came and got me and then walked me through the back. And I said, well, did anybody show up? Because it's been thunderstorming all afternoon, and I had so many friends that said, oh, I would have been there, and are they really going to put it on YouTube? And I said, well, Tom, you know, a lot of people that I know would love to maybe feel like they participated a little bit, at least out of friendship. So thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. Now, I put this on a tripod. There's a lot of pictures of us with Larry Hagman and Linda Gray and Ken Kercheval, and, you know, I mean, just pictures with the different stars. But the New York Post article was the one about how they were being stalked. And when I got to the Times Herald that day, there must have been 40 phone calls from Associated Press, from people all over the country, because people were so upset that there were stalkers going after the stars of Dallas. And at one point, the rest of the cast moved from the mansion to the Quorum Hotel over there on the tollway, and Linda Gray's mail started being picked through. And there were all these little eerie things that happened where people were so obsessive about how they felt about Dallas that there could have been something really bad happen. So they had to have high security around them all the time, and the mansion was very protective. But even then, Linda Gray, on her floor, a stalker got off on the elevator, and they had to send the security and, you know, get him out of there.
The only Dallas cast I ever met was Ken Percival, and I found him to be a very, very intelligent man. I mean, well-read. Okay, thank y'all for coming.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you all showing up.